Elias Thorne lived in a house that echoed, not with laughter or chatter, but with silence. Thick, polished silence that clung to the marble floors and high ceilings like a second skin. The estate sat on a quiet hill outside Seattle, surrounded by tall pines and a view that stretched all the way to the water. It was beautiful, yes, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was in its place. The books aligned just so on the shelves, the silverware polished to a gleam, the rugs vacuumed in perfect straight lines. But no one ever really lived there. Not in the way most people would understand. Elias had built an empire from nothing. He'd started with a garage, a laptop, and a stubborn belief that he could change how small businesses managed their data. 20 years later, his company was worth billions. His name printed in magazines, his face occasionally flashed on business news channels. But success came at a cost. Friends drifted away, unsure how to act around the man who could buy a private island on a whim. Romantic relationships fizzled out, either because he worked too much or because people assumed he only wanted someone who looked good on his arm. And lately, even the people he hired to keep his house running seemed to have hidden motives. Over the past year, little things had gone missing. A vintage watch from his study drawer, a few $100s from an unlocked safe, a rare first edition book that had belonged to his father. Nothing huge, but enough to make him uneasy. The previous housekeeper had quit suddenly, and the security footage showed nothing useful. So he'd decided to be more careful with who he let into his space. That's how Clara came into the picture. She'd been recommended by the wife of an old college friend, someone Elias actually trusted. The referral came with a simple note. She's quiet but honest. Needs the work. When Clara showed up for the interview, she didn't wear flashy clothes or try to charm him with big smiles. She wore a plain blouse and dark slacks, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She spoke softly, answered questions directly, and didn't ask about the salary until he brought it up. Most importantly, she didn't seem impressed by the house or his name. That alone made her stand out. He hired her on the spot. From day one, Clara was exactly as described, quiet, efficient, and invisible in the best possible way. She arrived at 7 every morning, left at 5, and never lingered. She cleaned without making a sound. No loud vacuuming, no humming, no phone calls. She folded his laundry with crisp precision, restocked the pantry before it ran low, and even figured out how he liked his coffee without being told twice. But she never made eye contact for more than a second. She never asked personal questions. And she never ever entered rooms he hadn't explicitly said she could clean. At first, Elias appreciated the professionalism, but after a few weeks, that same quietness began to gnaw at him. Not because he suspected her, he didn't, not really, but because he couldn't read her. In business, he prided himself on reading people quickly, their tells, their intentions, their weaknesses. But Clara gave him nothing. No nervous tics, no eagerness to please, no subtle hints of greed or curiosity about his life. It was almost unnerving. One evening, after a long board meeting that ended in frustration, he came home later than usual. The house was dimly lit, the only light coming from a lamp in the living room. Clara was just finishing up. She stood near the grand piano in the corner, dusting the top with a soft cloth. She didn't jump when he walked in, just turned slightly, gave a small nod, and said, "Good evening, sir. I'll be out in 10 minutes. He nodded back and sank into the sofa, too tired to move. She finished quickly and left without another word. But as he sat there in the quiet, something about the way she'd looked at the piano caught his attention. Not with awe or envy, just a quiet kind of sadness, like she recognized something in it. That night, lying in bed, an idea formed in his mind. Not a cruel one, not really, but a test. He'd heard stories from other wealthy friends about staff who acted one way during the day, and another when they thought no one was watching. Maybe Clara was different, but maybe she wasn't. He needed to know for sure. The next day, he made a show of feeling unwell after dinner. He told Clara he was going to rest on the living room sofa for a bit, and not to worry about cleaning in there that night. She nodded, concern flickering briefly in her eyes, and said she'd check on him before she left. At exactly 6:45 p.m., he lay down on the sofa, wrapped in a cashmere throw, eyes closed. He slowed his breathing, kept his body still. He'd done this before in negotiations, playing tired or distracted to see how others reacted when they thought he wasn't paying attention. It was a trick, yes, but in his world, trust had to be earned, not given. At 7:02 p.m., he heard the soft click of the kitchen door. Clara had finished her other tasks and was now moving into the living room. His heart beat a little faster, though he kept his face relaxed. He listened as her footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. Light, careful, like she was trying not to disturb the air itself. She didn't go near his briefcase, didn't peek at the papers on the coffee table, didn't even glance at the antique watch he'd left on the side table. Instead, he heard the soft rustle of fabric as she approached the piano. He cracked one eyelid, just a sliver, and watched. Clara stood in front of the piano for a long moment, her hands clasped in front of her. The instrument hadn't been played in over 12 years, not since his mother passed away. She'd been a concert pianist once before illness took her voice and then her life. Elias had kept the piano as a tribute but also as a barrier. No one touched it. No one dared, but Clara did. Very slowly she lifted the fallboard, the wooden cover over the keys, and ran her fingers along the edge like she was greeting an old friend. Then, without hesitation, she sat on the bench. She adjusted her posture, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. What happened next stopped him cold. Music filled the room, soft at first, then swelling with emotion. It wasn't random notes. It was a real piece, complex and layered, played with a tenderness that made his chest ache. He recognized it instantly. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece his mother used to play on rainy Sundays when he was a boy, curled up on that very sofa with a book in his lap. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His eyes stayed half-closed, but his mind was wide awake, racing. How did she know this piece? How did she know this piano? And why? Why would she play it now when she thought no one was watching? Tears welled in her eyes as she played, though she never stopped. Her shoulders trembled slightly, not from fear but from something deeper. Grief, maybe, or longing. She wasn't performing. She wasn't showing off. She was sharing something private, something raw, with a room she believed was empty. Elias lay there frozen not by suspicion, but by something far more powerful. Recognition. This wasn't the act of a thief. This was the act of someone who understood loss, someone who carried their own quiet pain. When the last note faded into the air, she sat still for a moment, hands resting on the keys. Then gently she closed the fallboard, wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, and stood up. She smoothed her uniform, glanced once toward the sofa, still believing he was asleep, and walked out of the room without a sound. Only when the front door clicked shut did Elias finally sit up. His heart pounded, but not from anger or suspicion. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel silent. It felt alive. And for the first time in even longer, he felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a rich man, but as someone who had lost something precious. He didn't know what he would say to her tomorrow, but he knew one thing for certain. Clara wasn't like the others. And maybe, just maybe, she was exactly the kind of person this empty house needed. The next morning came with soft rain tapping against the windows, the kind of gray drizzle that made the world feel wrapped in cotton. Elias woke earlier than usual, not because of an alarm or a meeting, but because his mind wouldn't stop replaying the music from the night before. The notes still echoed in his chest, quiet but insistent, like a whisper he couldn't ignore. He sat at the kitchen island in his robe, staring into his coffee, untouched. He'd rehearsed a dozen ways to approach Clara, accusatory, curious, casual, but none felt right. He didn't want to scare her, and he certainly didn't want to pretend he hadn't seen what he saw, because what he'd witnessed wasn't just someone playing piano. It was someone revealing a piece of their soul in a house that had long forgotten how to hold one. At exactly 7, the front door clicked open. Clara arrived right on time as always, her shoes damp from the rain. She nodded when she saw him, her expression calm but guarded. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, already moving toward the utility closet for her cleaning cart. "Clara," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. She stopped, turning slowly. Her hands stayed folded in front of her, posture polite but distant. He took a breath. "I heard you last night." Her face didn't change at first, just a slight tightening around her eyes, the kind of reaction someone has when they've been caught doing something they thought was private. But there was no panic, no stammering excuse. Just silence and then a quiet, "I'm sorry." I shouldn't have touched the piano. It's not that, he said quickly. I mean, I don't mind, I recognize the piece. She looked down at her hands. It's a beautiful composition. I didn't think anyone would mind if I played it for just a moment. You played it like you knew it, he said. Like it meant something to you. She hesitated, then nodded. It does. They stood there for a few seconds, the only sound the patter of rain and the hum of the refrigerator. Elias wasn't used to conversations that didn't have an agenda, a goal, a bottom line. But this felt different. This felt like stepping into a room he hadn't known existed in his own house. Would you play it again? He asked, surprising himself. Clara looked up, eyes wide, for just a second before she masked it. Now, in the morning? Whenever you're comfortable, he said. I haven't heard that piece in a very long time. She studied him as if trying to decide whether this was a test or a trap. Finally, she gave a small nod. After I finish the upstairs, if that's all right. Take your time, he said. He didn't go to his office that morning. Instead, he stayed in the living room, pretending to read while really just waiting. When she came back down an hour later, her cart parked neatly in the hall, she walked straight to the piano without a word. She lifted the fallboard again, sat, and began to play. This time he watched openly. No pretending to sleep. No hidden glances. Just him sitting in the armchair, listening. The music was even more moving in daylight. The rain outside softened the edges of the sound, wrapping it in a kind of gentle hush. Her fingers moved with confidence, but also with care, as if each note mattered. When she finished, she didn't get up right away. She just sat there, hands resting on the keys, breathing slowly. That was my mother's favorite piece, Elias said finally. Clara turned to him, surprised. I didn't know that. She used to play it every Sunday, he continued. Rain or shine, I'd lie on that sofa with a book and she'd say the music helped her think. Or maybe it helped her forget. I was too young to know the difference. Clara's expression softened. Music does that. It holds space for things we can't say out loud. He looked at her then, not as his employee, but as someone who understood that kind of silence. You're a musician, he said, not as a question, but as a realization. I used to be, she replied. Before life got complicated. He didn't press her right away. Instead, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He returned with 2 mugs of tea, chamomile, the kind his mother always kept on hand. He handed one to Clara. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, her fingers brushing his for just a second. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, the piano between them like a bridge. Finally, she spoke. I taught piano at a community center for 6 years, mostly kids from low-income families. Some of them had never touched an instrument before, but they'd light up the first time they played a full scale. That feeling, it's hard to describe. What happened? He asked gently. She looked out the window at the rain. The center lost funding during the pandemic. Then my father got sick. Medical bills piled up. I had to take whatever work I could find. Cleaning, part-time retail, overnight shifts at a warehouse. The piano lessons stopped. The piano itself. I sold it last year. Elias felt a pang in his chest. He'd spent millions on art, on cars, on vacations he barely remembered. But here was someone who'd given up something that clearly meant the world to her, just to keep her family afloat. And you recognize the piano? He asked. She nodded. Your mother gave a concert in Portland about 15 years ago. I was 16. My dad took me. It was my birthday gift. I'd never seen anyone play like that. Afterward, I bought a recording of her performance. That Chopin piece was the last one she played that night. Elias hadn't known that. He'd been away at college then, too busy building his first startup to go to the concert. He'd always regretted it. You remembered it all this time, he said. It stayed with me, she said simply, like a friend. He didn't know what to say to that. So he just sat with it. The weight of memory, the power of a single melody to connect 2 strangers across years and silence. Later that day, after Clara had finished her shift and left, Elias did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He walked over to the piano, opened the bench, and pulled out the sheet music his mother had kept inside. It was yellowed at the edges, her handwriting in the margins, little notes like slow here or feel the pause. He ran his fingers over the pages, then placed them neatly on top of the piano. The next morning, when Clara arrived, she saw the music waiting for her. She didn't say anything, but when she passed by the living room later, Elias noticed she'd placed a fresh tissue on the piano bench, just in case. Over the next few days, something shifted in the house. It wasn't dramatic. No grand speeches or sudden changes. But the silence began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting, like it knew something beautiful was about to happen. Clara started playing every evening after her work was done, always checking first if Elias was around. Sometimes he listened from the hallway. Sometimes he sat in the armchair with a book he wasn't really reading. Other times he'd ask her about the pieces she chose, why that one, what it meant, who wrote it. She'd answer in that same quiet way, but her eyes would light up when she talked about music. One evening she played a simple lullaby, something she'd written herself years ago for her younger sister. She used to have nightmares, Clara explained afterward. This helped her fall back asleep. Elias found himself thinking about that lullaby all the next day, not because it was complex or famous, but because it was made out of love, real, everyday love, the kind that shows up in small acts, in late-night songs, in quiet sacrifices. He started leaving small things out, not money, not gifts, but things that mattered. A new set of piano tuning tools, a book on music theory he found in an old bookstore, a framed photo of his mother at the piano taken backstage after one of her concerts. He never said why. He just left them where Clara would find them, and she never thanked him out loud. But one afternoon he walked into the living room and found her playing his mother's favorite piece again. Only this time, she'd added a few notes of her own at the end. A gentle variation like a reply across time. He stood in the doorway unseen, and for the first time in years he didn't feel alone in his own home. He didn't know where this was going, but for once he didn't need a plan. He just needed to listen. The days began to settle into a new kind of rhythm, one that didn't revolve around meetings, emails, or market reports, but around the soft sound of piano keys in the evening. Elias found himself looking forward to that hour more than anything else. It wasn't just the music. It was the quiet understanding that had grown between him and Clara, like two people slowly learning the same language without ever having to speak it aloud. One rainy Tuesday, after Clara finished dusting the library, she lingered near the doorway instead of heading straight to the next room. Elias was sitting at his desk pretending to review a contract, though his eyes kept drifting to the window where raindrops raced down the glass. "Sir?" she said finally, voice low but steady. He looked up. "Yes?" She took a small step inside. "I wanted to thank you for letting me play, and for the things you've left out." "The book, the photo, it meant a lot," he set his pen down. "You don't have to thank me. The piano was meant to be played. I just forgot that for a while." She nodded but didn't leave. There was something else on her mind. He could see it in the way her fingers twisted slightly at the hem of her apron. After a pause, she said, "My sister starts college next month." "That's wonderful," he said, genuinely. "She got a partial scholarship," Clara continued, "but it's not enough. Books, housing, lab fees, it adds up fast. I've been saving every extra dollar, but..." She trailed off, not asking for anything, just stating a fact, the way someone might mention the weather. Elias didn't interrupt. He'd learned by now that Clara didn't speak unless she meant it. And when she did, it was never to manipulate or impress. She was just telling the truth, quietly, honestly. "I work 2 extra shifts a week at a laundromat," she added, "on my days off. It's not much, but it helps." He felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Not pity, but respect. Real deep respect for someone who carried so much without complaint. He thought about all the times he'd signed million-dollar deals without blinking. All the luxury he treated as normal. And here was someone working double shifts just to give her sister a chance. "You shouldn't have to do that," he said gently. She gave a small, tired smile. "It's okay. I don't mind. She's smart, really smart. She wants to be a teacher, says the world needs more people who listen." He looked at her then, really looked, saw the faint shadows under her eyes, the careful way she held herself like she was used to making herself small so others could take up space. And he realized something. He'd been watching her play the piano, but he hadn't truly seen her, not until now. "Let me help," he said. Clara's eyes widened slightly. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted softly. "But I want to. Not as your employer, just as someone who understands what it's like to want the best for someone you love." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I couldn't accept a handout. It's not a handout, he said. It's an investment. In your sister, in you. Think of it as a music scholarship. You keep playing. She keeps studying. And maybe someday she'll teach kids who've never heard a piano before just like you did. Clara's breath caught. She looked down, blinking fast. When she looked up again, her eyes were clear but softer. Why are you doing this? He thought about it. Because I spent years building something big, but I forgot how to build something real. You reminded me. She didn't say anything for a while. Just stood there, the rain tapping gently outside, the house holding its breath. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but only if it's a loan. I'll pay it back. Every cent, he almost argued, but then he saw the pride in her stance, the quiet dignity that wouldn't let her take charity. So he nodded back. All right, a loan. With 0 interest. And you can pay it back however you want. Teaching lessons here, helping restore this old piano, even just keeping this house from feeling like a tomb. A small smile touched her lips. Deal. That evening, for the first time, she played something new. Not a classical piece, not his mother's favorite, but a simple, original melody. It started slow and thoughtful, then built into something hopeful like sunlight breaking through clouds. When she finished, she turned to him. That's for your sister, he said. She shook her head. That's for you. He didn't understand at first. But later, as he lay in bed, the tune replayed in his mind, and he realized it wasn't just music. It was gratitude, trust, a bridge being built, note by note. Over the next week, things changed in subtle but real ways. Clara still cleaned the house with the same care, but now she'd hum sometimes while she worked. She started leaving the French doors to the garden open in the afternoons, letting in the sound of birds and wind. And Elias? He began eating dinner in the dining room instead of at his desk. He even bought fresh flowers for the entryway, something his mother used to do every week. One afternoon he found Clara in the music room, not cleaning, but carefully tuning the piano. She'd brought in a small toolkit and was adjusting the strings with focused precision. You know how to tune it? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. My first piano teacher taught me, she said without looking up. Said if you love an instrument, you learn to care for it, not just play it. He watched her work, the way her hands moved with confidence and tenderness. You really love music, don't you? It's the only thing that's never let me down, she said simply. Even when I couldn't afford lessons, even when I had to sell my piano, I could still hear it in my head. It kept me going. He thought about that, how something as simple as a melody could be an anchor in the stormiest times. How art, in its purest form, wasn't about fame or money. It was about connection, survival, hope. Would you ever teach again? He asked. She paused, hand resting on a key. If I could. But private lessons cost money most families don't have, and I don't have a space. He didn't say anything right then, but the idea took root in his mind and wouldn't let go. A few days later, he called a contractor. Not for renovations or upgrades, but to convert the unused sunroom on the east side of the house into a proper music studio. Soundproof walls, good lighting, a second upright piano, shelves for sheet music. He didn't tell Clara at first. He just let the work begin quietly. When she noticed the workers, she asked what was happening. Just fixing up an old room, he said casually. But one evening, after she'd played her usual piece, he walked her to the sunroom and opened the door. Inside, the space was warm and bright, even in the fading light. The new piano stood in the center, polished and ready. Sheet music was neatly arranged on a shelf. A small chalkboard on the wall read, "Music is how we speak when words aren't enough." Clara stood in the doorway, completely still. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. But the way her hand reached out to touch the piano lid, like it was something sacred, told him everything. She can take her first lesson here, Elias said softly. Your sister. Before she leaves for school. And after that, maybe other kids. From the community center. From the neighborhood. Anyone who wants to learn. Clara turned to him, eyes shining. You'd let me do that here? This house has been empty for too long, he said. It's time it held something real again. She nodded slowly, then walked to the piano and sat down. She didn't play a grand piece or a showy scale. She played a simple C major chord. Clear, strong, full of promise. And in that moment, the house didn't echo with silence anymore. It hummed with possibility. The sunroom quickly became the heart of the house, not because it was the fanciest room, but because it was the only one that truly lived. Every afternoon after her cleaning duties, Clara would open the French doors to let in fresh air, adjust the bench, and wait. At first it was just her younger sister who came by on weekends, shy at first but lighting up the moment her fingers touched the keys. Then slowly others began to appear. A neighbor's son, 10 years old, whose school had cut its music program. A teenage girl from the bus stop down the road who'd always wanted to learn, but whose family couldn't afford lessons. Then 2 more kids from the old community center Clara used to work at, parents dropping them off with grateful, hesitant smiles, unsure if this was really free. It was. Elias made sure of it. He didn't want money to be part of it. Instead, he asked only that the students help with small things, watering the plants in the hallway, organizing sheet music, or even just tidying up after their lesson. Not as payment, but as a way to belong. Clara taught with the same quiet patience she did everything else. She never raised her voice, never made anyone feel small for hitting a wrong note. She'd just smile gently and say, "Try it again. You're closer than you think." And somehow that was enough. The kids listened. They practiced. They came back. Elias started sitting in on the lessons, not every day, but often enough that the children grew used to him. He'd bring tea for Clara, sometimes cookies for the kids, and sit in the corner with a book he rarely read. He watched how Clara's eyes softened when a student finally played a full scale without stumbling. How she'd lean forward, hands hovering, ready to guide but never taking over. She didn't just teach music, she taught confidence, one note at a time. One evening, after the last student had left, Elias stayed behind. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the piano keys. "You're good at this," he said. Clara was wiping down the bench. "I just show them what I know." "It's more than that," he said. "You make them feel like they matter." She paused, then looked out the window. "I remember what it felt like, to be told I wasn't good enough, that music wasn't practical. I don't want anyone else to feel that way." He nodded. "You're giving them something I never knew how to give." She turned to him, surprised. "You've given them this room, this chance. And you've given it meaning," he said. "There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, birds called to each other in the trees. Inside, the house felt warm in a way it hadn't in years. Over the next few weeks, Elias began to change in ways he hadn't expected. He stopped checking his phone during dinner. He started walking in the garden in the mornings, just to feel the air on his face. He even called his younger brother for the first time in months, not to talk business, but just to hear his voice one afternoon, while watching Clara teach a little boy how to count beats with his feet. Elias realized something. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was part of it. The laughter, the mistakes, the small victories, they weren't happening around him. They were happening with him. He started asking Clara questions, not about the house or her schedule, but about her life. Her childhood in a small coastal town, how she'd saved up for her first keyboard by collecting bottles, how she used to play for her grandmother, who'd fall asleep to the sound of lullabies, and slowly she began to share, carefully at first, then with more ease, like a door she'd kept locked for years was finally creaking open. One rainy evening, after everyone had gone home, they sat in the living room with mugs of hot tea. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The teaching?" "Before everything got hard," she wrapped her hands around her mug. "Every day. But I never stopped believing in it. Even when I couldn't do it, I held on to the idea that music could change someone's day, maybe even their life." He looked at her. "It changed mine." She smiled just a little. "You say that like it was magic, wasn't it?" he said. A quiet woman walks into a silent house, plays a song no one's heard in years, and suddenly, everything feels possible again. She didn't argue, just looked into her tea, her expression thoughtful. Later that week, Elias did something unusual. He canceled a board meeting. Not postponed, canceled. His assistant was stunned. "Is everything all right, sir?" "Better than it's been in a long time," he said. Instead of flying to New York, he spent the day helping Clara set up for a small recital. Just 6 students playing for their families in the sunroom. Folding chairs, a few potted plants, a simple banner that read, "First Notes." He hung fairy lights along the windows, tuned the piano himself, badly, but Clara laughed and fixed it, and even baked cookies, burnt around the edges, but the kids didn't care. When the recital began, he stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. The first student, the 10-year-old boy, played a simple melody with shaky hands. When he finished, his mother wiped her eyes. The teenage girl played a pop song she'd arranged herself, surprisingly good. And Clara's sister played the lullaby Clara had written years ago, now polished and full of heart. Afterward, parents thanked Elias, but he shook his head. "Thank her," he said, nodding to Clara. "She's the one who made this happen." That night, long after everyone had left, Clara stayed to clean up. Elias helped, stacking chairs and blowing out candles. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "I wanted to," he replied. "And not just for them. For me too." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he saw something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude, but understanding. Like she finally saw him not as the man who owned the house, but as someone who'd been lost too. "I used to think success was about building something no one else could," he said quietly. "But maybe it's about building something that lets others grow." She nodded. "That's the kind of success that lasts." They stood there in the quiet room, the last candle flickering between them. No titles, no roles. Just two people who'd found something real in the most unexpected place. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The idea started as a whisper, just a thought over tea one evening, half joking, half hopeful. "What if we did something bigger?" Elias had said, watching Clara wipe down the piano after another afternoon lesson. She'd looked up, curious. "Bigger than this?" He'd nodded. "Bigger than just this room. Something that lasts." Now, 3 months later, that whisper had become real. The house, once silent and stiff, was buzzing with life. Not the kind of buzz that came from business deals or high-powered guests, but the warm, messy, joyful noise of children practicing scales, parents chatting in the hallway, and music spilling out of open windows on sunny afternoons. The official name was simple: the Harbor Music Project. It wasn't flashy. There were no logos on t-shirts or press releases, just a small sign by the garden gate that read, "Free lessons for kids who love sound." And it worked. Word spread through schools, community centers, even the local library. Soon, there was a waiting list. Elias didn't just fund it, he shaped it. He met with teachers, helped design a simple curriculum, and even sat in on planning sessions, though he always deferred to Clara on anything musical. "You're the heart of this," he told her once. "I'm just the hands that help build the space around it." She'd smiled. "Then we make a good team," and they did. Their rhythm had settled into something natural, like two instruments finally playing in tune. He handled logistics, permissions, supplies. She handled the soul of it, the teaching, the encouragement, the quiet moments when a child needed to hear, "You're doing better than you think." Then came the invitation. It started with a phone call from a local arts nonprofit. They were hosting a small charity evening at a historic theater downtown, fundraising for youth arts programs. Would the Harbor Music Project like to perform? Clara hesitated. "It's just kids," she said when she told Elias. "They're not ready for a real stage." "They are more ready than you think," he replied. "And it's not about being perfect. It's about being seen." She thought about it all night. The next morning she agreed, but only if it was a group piece, something they could do together. No solos, no pressure. Just music shared. Rehearsals began in the sunroom, now officially dubbed the studio. The kids practiced harder than ever. Mistakes were made, tempers flared, tears were shed, but Clara never raised her voice. She just said, "Let's try again." And somehow that was enough. Elias watched it all unfold with a quiet pride he hadn't known he was capable of. He wasn't proud because it was his money or his house. He was proud because he'd helped create a place where someone like Clara could shine, and where kids who'd never touched a piano before now believed they belonged in a room full of music. The night of the event arrived cool and clear. The theater was modest but elegant, with red velvet seats and a stage lit by soft golden lights. Backstage, the kids fidgeted in their simple outfits, dark pants, white shirts, hair neatly combed. Clara moved among them, calm and steady, adjusting collars, whispering last-minute reminders. Elias stood near the wings, dressed in a dark suit but feeling more nervous than he ever had before a shareholder meeting. He wasn't performing, but this felt more important. This wasn't about profit or reputation. It was about trust. Then the host stepped to the microphone. "Tonight we're honored to welcome a very special group," he said. "They come from a home that opened its doors not for fame, but for kindness. Please welcome the students of the Harbor Music Project. And their teacher, a pause. Then, and joining them at the piano, Mr. Elias Thorne. Clara turned, eyes wide. Elias hadn't told her he'd be playing. He just gave her a small nod. They walked on stage together. The kids lined up behind the grand piano. Clara took her place on the bench. Elias sat beside her, not to lead, but to support. The piece they'd chosen was simple but powerful, a gentle arrangement of the Chopin Nocturne, layered with a new melody Clara had written. It began with her alone, fingers finding the familiar notes that had once filled an empty house. Then one by one the students joined in, not on piano but with soft percussion, recorders, even a cello borrowed from a local teacher. It wasn't perfect. A note wavered here, a beat rushed there, but it was alive, honest, full of heart. In the front row, parents held hands. A few wiped tears, and in the back the director of the nonprofit nodded slowly, already making notes for a larger grant proposal. When the last note faded, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. Afterward, people came up to thank them. Not just the kids, but Clara. "You've given them a gift," one mother said, voice thick. "Not just music, confidence," Clara just smiled. "They gave it to themselves. I just showed them the door." Later, as they packed up, Elias found Clara standing alone near the stage door, looking out at the quiet street. "You were amazing," he said. She shook her head. "They were." He handed her a cup of tea from the green room. "I meant what I said earlier. You're the heart of this." She took a sip, then looked at him. "And you're the reason it exists." "No," he said gently. "I just had the space. You had the vision." They stood there for a while, the city humming softly around them. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just two people who'd found something rare, a purpose that wasn't about themselves. In the weeks that followed, things grew, but carefully. The nonprofit offered funding to expand the program. A local school asked if Clara could come once a week to teach. Elias set up a small foundation in his mother's name, not for big donations, but to ensure the lessons would always be free, always accessible. Clara still cleaned the house, by choice, not necessity. She liked the routine, she said, and Elias liked having her there. But now her days began in the sunroom, not the laundry room. She taught in the mornings, cleaned in the afternoons, and sometimes in the evenings she and Elias would sit together and play, just for fun, just for peace. One Sunday, much like the ones from his childhood, Elias lay on the sofa with a book. Rain tapped at the windows, and from the other room, music drifted in, soft, familiar, full of warmth. He closed his eyes and smiled. The house no longer echoed with silence. It sang, and in that song 2 lives, once lonely, once guarded, had found harmony not through grand gestures, but through small acts of courage, kindness, and the quiet belief that everyone deserves a chance to be heard. Years later, people would talk about the Harbor Music Project, how it started in a quiet mansion, how it changed lives, how it proved that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single note played in the dark. But for those who lived it, it was never about legacy. It was about a shy woman who played when she thought no one was watching, and a man who finally learned to listen.